The world died quietly, not in fire, but in the slow suffocation of its own creation. Above the poisoned earth, cities of steel float like ghosts, relics of humanity's arrogance, clinging to the skies that no longer belong to them. Beneath the rotting underbelly of one such city, a scavenger named Kale hunts for fragments of the past, broken circuits, shattered dreams, whispers of a world long gone. He doesn't believe in salvation, only in survival. But when a secret buried deep within the city's foundations begins to stir, Kale finds himself drawn into a fight he never asked for, a rebellion against a tyrant who rules from the clouds, and a truth that could shatter what remains of civilization. Under the iron skies, the lines between hope and despair blur. The air hums with rebellion, the steel trembles with the weight of lies, and every heartbeat is a countdown to collapse. The storm is coming, and when it breaks, the sky itself will burn. The sharp wind bit through the layers of patchwork scavenger gear Kale wore, carrying with it the acrid scent of burnt circuitry and decay. He moved cautiously over the jagged remains of a sky platform that had long since surrendered to rust and rot, metal beams twisted into grotesque sculptures by the relentless ravages of time and neglect. Above him, the sky was a churn of heavy gray clouds, swollen with the promise of a coming storm. Distant thunder rumbled low, a steady drumbeat against the fragile heartbeat of the city. Kale's eyes, dark and restless, flicked across the ruined landscape. The outskirts of the floating metropolis were a maze of broken tech and shattered dreams, remnants of a civilization clinging desperately to the skies above a poisoned earth. The towering iron giants that sustained the city groaned faintly in the toxic breeze, their structural integrity compromised by years of environmental decay and the careless machinations of those in power. His boots crunched over shards of glass and splintered metal as he searched for anything of value, scraps of circuitry, fragments of power cells, anything that could be repurposed or traded. Survival demanded resourcefulness, and Kale had learned to read the signs of collapse like a second language. The flicker of failing neon signs, the distant hum of malfunctioning generators, the sudden silence where life should have thrived, all whispered warnings. The city itself was a labyrinth of contradictions. Above, gleaming spires pierced the sky, their glass facades reflecting the sickly orange glow of the polluted horizon. Below, in the lower echelons where Kale scavenged, shadows lengthened over alleyways cluttered with refuse and the skeletal remains of derelict drones. The disparity was stark, a physical manifestation of the political tension simmering just beneath the surface. As Kale crept through a narrow passage framed by rusted girders, he caught sight of movement ahead. A squad of sky guards, their sleek black uniforms stark against the mottled steel and grime, patrolled the area. Their helmets gleamed under the flickering lights, visors reflecting the neon glow with an unsettling, impersonal sheen. Their voices were low but sharp, questioning a scrawny scavenger caught with stolen tech. The man's eyes darted nervously, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. Kale froze behind a broken wall, heart pounding, as he waited for the guards to pass. The tension in the air was palpable, a fragile thread stretched taut by fear and suspicion. These enforcers of Governor Ralvik's regime were a constant reminder that freedom here was a fragile illusion, maintained by force and intimidation. Once the patrol moved on, Kale pressed forward, the weight of countless eyes feeling heavy on his back. He paused briefly atop a rusted beam, the city sprawling beneath him like a broken jewel suspended in a poisoned sky. The horizon shimmered with unstable energy fields, faint cracks of light tracing the outlines of the floating structures, as if the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. The distant thunder grew louder, echoing through the hollow spaces between the towers, a grim portent of the turmoil to come. Kale's thoughts drifted to the rumors whispered in shadowed corners, the impending collapse of the iron giants, the secrets buried beneath the toxic soil, and the growing unrest among the oppressed. He exhaled slowly, the mist of his breath mingling with the sour air. Despite the despair etched into every corner of this fractured world, a spark of determination flickered within him. Survival was not just about scavenging parts or evading patrols. It was about uncovering the truth and fighting for a future beyond the rust and ruin. The storm was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would test every shred of hope Cale had left. But for now, he moved forward, shadows stretching long behind him as the iron skies darkened. The city's fragile dance of decay and defiance had begun anew, and Cale was caught in its relentless tide. The lower levels of the floating city were a world apart from the gleaming spires above. Here, the air was thick with the smell of rust and burnt circuitry, and the distant hum of failing engines echoed like ghostly whispers. Cale moved carefully, his boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted metal on the skeletal remains of an old sky platform. The sun was sinking, tinting the horizon a deep blood red that seemed to bleed into the poisoned clouds circling the city like vultures. He crouched beside a fractured console, fingers deftly probing the exposed circuits. Years of scavenging had sharpened his instincts. He could spot salvageable components where others saw only wreckage. The platform groaned beneath him, a reminder that the city itself was slowly dying. Every creak and shudder sent a shiver down his spine, not just from the cold. Memories crept unbidden into his mind, shadows of a past he tried to keep locked away. The sky raid that had stolen his family, the screams over the radio, the desperate scramble for safety. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the stale air, steeling himself against the ache. Survival demanded focus. A faint clatter caught his attention. Cale's hand moved to the knife at his belt as he scanned the horizon. Figures emerged from the smoke and rubble, sky raiders, their patched leather armor gleaming faintly in the dying light. Their leader, a tall brute with a jagged scar slicing through his cheek, spotted Cale and bellowed orders. Cale's heart pounded as he darted between rusted beams, the raiders in close pursuit. Gunfire cracked, and sparks flew as a raider's blade met Cale's knife. He twisted, parried, and pushed forward, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The platform's edge loomed ahead, a deadly drop into the swirling mists below. In a desperate gamble, Cale leapt onto a broken walkway, the metal groaning underfoot. Behind him, the raiders hesitated, snarling in frustration. Seizing the moment, Cale sprinted toward a narrow gap in the city's lower sectors, slipping through just as the raiders regrouped. Breath ragged, he ducked into a shadowed alley where a figure waited, a woman with short-cropped red hair and grime-streaked clothes. She eyed him warily, hands resting on the grip of a compact energy pistol. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, voice low but firm. Cale nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're Lyra," she gave a curt nod. "Rebel pilot and mechanic, and you're the scavenger everyone's been whispering about." They fell into step, moving through the maze of lower city streets. As they walked, Lyra's fierce gaze softened slightly. "Lost someone in the raids?" Cale's jaw tightened. "Family." Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. "Same here. The city's rulers let it happen, and now they tighten their grip. We're not just fighting raiders, we're fighting them." Their uneasy alliance was forged in shared pain and a mutual hunger for change. Lyra led Cale to a hidden workshop cluttered with scavenged tech and maps of the city's vulnerable points. Their plans were quietly being made to challenge the status quo. The night deepened as they talked, plans, fears, fragments of hope piecing together like the broken city around them. Outside, the distant rumble of the city's groaning steel underscored their fragile existence. Storm clouds gathered, dark and heavy, threatening to drown the last light. Cale's thoughts drifted to the sky raids to come, the battles looming on the horizon. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something more than survival, hope. It was fragile, like the city itself, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. As they parted ways, Lyra's voice held a warning and a promise. "We'll need every ally we can get. The fight's just beginning." Cale watched her disappear into the shadows, the weight of the city pressing down on him. The fragments of the fallen were many, but from their ruins, something new might yet rise. The iron skies above might be crumbling, but beneath them, a rebellion was stirring. And Cale was at its heart. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant howl of approaching engines. Another raid, another test of their resolve. The night was far from over, and the fight for survival had only just begun. The city's metallic heart throbbed beneath Kale's feet, a restless beast of iron and steel suspended high above the poisoned earth. Overhead, the sky was a dull, sickly gray, thick with the residue of long-forgotten fires and chemical clouds. The distant clatter of machinery echoed through the labyrinthine corridors, a constant reminder of the fragile balance that held the floating metropolis aloft. Kale's boots clanged softly against the rusted grating as he moved with practiced caution, shadowed by Lyra's determined stride beside him. "Keep your voice low," Lyra whispered, her eyes sharp beneath the hood of her grease-stained jacket. Her red hair, cropped short for practicality, caught the faint glimmer of the flickering lights as they slipped deeper into the restricted zone. "Ralvik's propaganda is ringing through every speaker. They want us scared, divided." Kale nodded, his gaze flickering toward a nearby loudspeaker mounted high on a twisted steel beam. The governor's voice boomed across the city, smooth and commanding, layered with the synthetic clarity of reinforced broadcasts. "Citizens of the floating city, stability is our shield against chaos. Trust in the order we provide. Any dissent threatens the lives we protect." The words rang hollow to Kale's ears. Beneath the polished surfaces and soaring towers, the city was crumbling. He could feel it in the tremors beneath his feet, in the leaking steam that hissed through cracks in the piping, in the whispered rumors of failing life support systems and disappearing resources. As they slipped past a cluster of security drones patrolling the corridor, Kale's heart hammered against his ribs. The air was thick with the scent of burnt oil and something metallic, sharp and acrid. Ahead, the passage opened into a vast chamber where faded control panels blinked erratically, screens flickering with static and indecipherable code. Lyra crouched beside an access terminal, her fingers dancing over the brittle keys with practiced ease. "If we can get through the firewall, we might find proof of what's really going on," she murmured. Her breath came in short bursts, a mixture of adrenaline and cold. Kale kept watch, eyes darting between the shadows where patrols could appear at any moment. The tension knotted in his stomach as the terminal resisted their intrusion, encrypted layers peeling away one by one under Lyra's deft hacking. Suddenly, the screen stabilized, revealing a cascade of internal reports marked confidential and urgent. "Look at this," Lyra said, voice barely above a whisper. "Reports of system failures, suppressed maintenance logs, warnings ignored. Someone doesn't want this information to get out." Kale scanned the data, noting technical jargon that masked a grim reality. The city's infrastructure was failing, with critical systems on the brink of collapse. The elite rulers, cloaked in their propaganda, were hiding the truth from the masses, preserving a fragile illusion of control. A distant clang echoed through the chamber, and Kale's pulse quickened. "We need to move," he urged. "We've stayed too long." They slipped back into the shadows, the oppressive hum of machinery following them like a sinister chorus. Outside, the city sprawled beneath the iron skies, a patchwork of light and shadow, hope and despair. Kale's mind raced with the knowledge they had uncovered, the growing gulf between the rulers and the oppressed. "This isn't just about survival," Lyra said quietly as they vanished into the maze. "It's about who gets to decide the future." Kale's jaw tightened. The whispers in the iron were growing louder, and the fragile peace was unraveling. The time for hiding was ending. The city was listening, and soon so would the world. But as they disappeared into the labyrinth, a cold voice crackled over a nearby speaker. "Be warned, traitors and insurgents. Governor Ralvik's justice is swift and absolute." Kale's eyes met Lyra's, a silent vow passing between them. The fight was just beginning. The narrow corridor was thick with the stale scent of dust and rust, the metallic groan of the floating city echoing faintly above. Kale moved cautiously, his boots stirring up motes of debris that danced in the weak light filtering through cracked vents. The scavenger's eyes, sharp and wary, scanned the shadows as he followed the faint hum of machinery deeper into the labyrinth beneath the city's steel bones. The entrance to the hidden laboratory was nearly obscured by a rusted panel, its edges corroded and peeling. Cale brushed aside the remnants of a discarded tarp and pressed his hand against the cold metal. A faint click and a low hiss signaled the door's reluctant opening. Inside, the air was colder, tinged with the sterile chill of forgotten technology. Flickering monitors lined the walls, their screens sputtering with fragmented data and the ghostly glow of half-erased schematics. Scattered papers littered the floor, some stained with smudged ink, others brittle with age. The hum of a power source, irregular yet persistent, pulsed like a heartbeat within the room. From the shadows emerged a figure, thin and pale, his glasses catching the dim light as he stepped forward. Iran's eyes, sharp and calculating, met Cale's with a guarded intensity. "I didn't expect anyone else to find this place," he murmured, voice low yet steady, "especially not someone from the upper levels." Cale shifted uneasily. "I'm no friend of the elite," he replied, "but I need answers." Iran nodded, gesturing toward a cluttered console. "The answers you seek are buried deep, beneath layers of lies and silence. What I have here is only a fragment, the truth they tried to erase." With a flick of his wrist, Iran activated a holographic projector. Ethereal blue light bathed the room, casting shifting images of soil samples marked with toxic readings and faded documents detailing experimental protocols. The display revealed disturbing data. The Earth's poisoning was not an accident, but the consequence of deliberate, unethical experiments carried out under the city ruler's watchful eyes. Cale leaned closer, his breath shallow. "They knew," he whispered, "and they let it happen?" Iran's gaze darkened. "More than that, they covered it up, manipulated the truth to maintain control. The floating cities were never meant to be permanent sanctuaries. They were a last-ditch effort to escape the consequences of their own actions." A sudden tremor shook the floor beneath them, sending a shiver through the metal framework. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the distant rumble of shifting structures reminded them of the precariousness of their refuge. Cale's hand instinctively moved to the makeshift weapon at his side. "We don't have much time," Iran said, urgency creeping into his voice. "Governor Ralvik's forces are tightening their grip. They'll come looking for anyone who dares to uncover the past." Cale's jaw clenched. "Then we have to move quickly. If the people above knew what was hidden beneath their feet, maybe they'd fight back. Maybe we could change the course of this dying world." The two men began to seal the laboratory's entrance, barricading it with scavenged scrap and activating silent alarms that only they could detect. In the dim glow of the holograms, plans were drawn, risks assessed, and alliances forged, not out of trust, but necessity. Despite the weight of despair settled over the poisoned earth, a fragile spark of hope flickered between them. Beneath the iron skies and the shattered floating cities, the truth awaited its reckoning. Cale glanced once more at the holographic images before they dimmed, a silent vow etched into his mind: to unveil the buried past, no matter the cost. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something more powerful than survival: purpose. As the distant thunder rolled across the sky, the hidden laboratory fell into an uneasy silence, the echoes of forbidden knowledge reverberating through the steel and shadows. The metallic groan of the floating city's outer platforms was barely audible beneath the distant rumble of engines slicing through the thick, polluted air. Cale crouched low amid the twisted remnants of what had once been a cargo crane, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sky blurred into a haze of ash and cloud. Beside him, Lyra's short-cropped red hair caught the occasional flicker of dying sunlight, her eyes scanning the approaching silhouettes with a practiced intensity. "They're coming," Lyra murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, though the urgency was unmistakable. Cale nodded, tightening his grip on the salvaged pulse rifle pressed against his side. The convoy was due to pass through this sector any moment now, carrying the supplies the rebels desperately needed to sustain their fragile resistance. But out here, in the shadows of the city's decaying underbelly, danger was a constant companion. A sudden shriek tore through the air, sharp and chilling. Kale's heart lurched as the first of Jax's raiders appeared over the jagged skyline, sleek, brutal aircraft adorned with jagged insignias and bristling with weaponry. The sky erupted into chaos as alarms blared, the convoy's hovercraft scrambling to mount a defense. Explosions blossomed like dark flowers against the gray, poisoned sky. Kale cursed under his breath, adrenaline surging as he grabbed Lyra's arm. "We need to move now." They sprinted across the rickety metal walkways, the sounds of gunfire and shouting growing louder behind them. Tracer rounds zipped past, some tearing into the rusted surfaces around them with sparks and shrieks. Kale ducked behind a stack of shipping containers just as a nearby platform exploded, sending a shower of debris raining down. Breathing hard, Lyra peered over the edge, eyes narrowing. "The convoy's falling apart. We've got to warn the others." Kale shook his head. "Too late for that. We need to survive first." They sprinted again, weaving through the skeletal remains of the city's infrastructure. The pursuit was relentless. Raider fighters swooped down, their engines roaring like angry beasts. Kale's pulse hammered in his ears as he fired bursts at a pursuing craft, forcing it to veer off with a sputtering explosion. "This way," Lyra beckoned, leading him toward a narrow skyrail barely wide enough for one person. They clambered aboard, the platform rattling underfoot as it swung precariously over the void. Below, the convoy was obliterated. Kale caught glimpses of burning transport pods plummeting toward the earth, the fires casting a hellish glow on the poisoned clouds. The loss was staggering, the supplies gone in moments, devoured by the merciless raiders. As they reached a safer distance, Kale and Lyra paused, chests heaving. The distant roar of Sky Raider engines faded slowly, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down like a weight. "They're getting bolder," Lyra said grimly. "If we don't strike back, there won't be anything left to fight for." Kale's mind raced. The rebels were fractured, stretched thin across the floating city's crumbling expanse. Yet giving in to fear was not an option. "We need to regroup, gather what's left, and plan." Later, in the dim glow of the rebel hideout, the air thick with the smell of oil and sweat, Kale and Lyra convened with others. Maps were spread, fingers tracing possible ambush points and escape routes. Voices were low but urgent, each person acutely aware that their survival depended on unity and swift action. "Jax isn't just a raider," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the tension. "He's a symbol of everything wrong with this world, lawless, ruthless, and hungry. We need to be smarter, faster." Kale met her gaze, his own resolve hardening. "Then we'll make sure he regrets crossing us." Outside, the iron skies darkened with gathering storm clouds, ominous, relentless. The war for survival was only just beginning, and every shadow held the threat of death. But beneath the iron skies, amidst the ruins of a broken world, a spark of rebellion kindled, fragile, fierce, and unyielding. As the chapter closed, Kale's thoughts lingered on the horizon, where darkness and danger intertwined. The next move would be crucial, and failure was no longer an option. The air hung thick, with a biting, chemical tang as Kale adjusted the straps on his respirator, the hiss of filtered air steady in his ears. Around him, the landscape shifted from the familiar metallic sprawl of the floating city's lower levels to a forbidding stretch of cracked earth and twisted, corroded remnants. This was the Forbidden Zone, a place whispered about in scavenger circles but rarely dared. Here, beneath the toxic fog, lay secrets that the city's rulers had long tried to conceal. Beside him, Iran moved with a cautious grace, his thin frame almost swallowed by the folds of his worn lab coat. The scientist's glasses caught the dim light from the flickering flashlight as he scanned the ground, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into his face. "We're close," Iran murmured, voice barely above the mechanical drone of their breathing apparatuses. The readings suggest something just beneath this layer, artifacts older than anything the city archives mention. Kale's gaze swept the horizon. Jagged metal shards jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient leviathan, all warped and rusted by years of neglect and exposure. The sky above was a sickly blend of muted purples and grays, the sun, a dim glow behind clouds heavy with toxic rain. Every step forward was a reminder of the risk, the ground unstable, the air laced with poisons that no filter could fully purge. They moved slowly, alert to every creak and groan of the earth. Kale's scavenger instincts sharpened. The faintest crack, a shifting shadow, told stories of decay and danger. "Keep close," he said softly, eyes darting to the dark shapes lurking in the fog. Iran nodded, crouching suddenly by a half-buried object. His gloved fingers brushed away layers of contaminated soil, revealing a surface etched with strange symbols. "Look at this," he breathed. The artifact was a fragment of a larger structure, its faded carvings glowing faintly under their lights. A relic from a time before the skies had turned iron and the earth had become poison. Kale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. How could this have been hidden? Why bury it here? He wondered aloud. "Because the truth is dangerous," Iran replied, voice heavy. "If people knew what was really buried beneath their feet, the experiments, the betrayals, it could shatter everything." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. A low rumble echoed through the fog, dust cascading from the skeletal remains of a collapsed platform overhead. Kale reacted instantly, pulling Iran out of the way as debris tumbled down. Heart pounding, they scrambled to safer ground, the fragile earth threatening to swallow them whole. "We can't stay here long," Kale said, voice tense but steady. "The city's collapse is coming faster than we thought." Iran wiped sweat from his brow, eyes alight with a mix of fear and determination. "But this discovery, it changes everything. If we can bring this to light, maybe there's a chance to fix what's broken." They pressed on, the artifacts growing more numerous and complex as they ventured deeper. Each piece told a fragment of a forgotten story, a world that had once thrived on the surface, undone by hubris and greed. The weight of that truth settled heavily on Kale's shoulders, mingling with the urgency of their mission. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, the two stood at the edge of the zone, overlooking a vast expanse of ruins swallowed by the poisoned earth. The sky, a bruised canvas of oranges and purples, seemed to weep for what had been lost. Kale's fingers tightened around the artifact in his pack, his mind racing. "We have to bring this back," he said, voice low but resolute. "People need to know." Iran nodded, eyes reflecting the dim light. "Then we're ready for what comes next." Together, they turned back toward the city, hearts heavy but their purpose clear. Beneath the surface, the past waited, and with it, the hope of a future reclaimed from the iron skies and poisoned earth. The journey was far from over, and the dangers ahead only grew sharper. But for Kale and Iran, the discovery beneath the toxic soil was a beacon, a fragile spark of truth in a world on the brink. As they disappeared into the mist, the distant rumble of the floating city's failing engines echoed like a warning. The sky was darkening, and the secrets beneath would soon demand reckoning. Yet amidst the shadows, a stubborn hope flickered, one that would drive them to face the abyss, no matter the cost. The story of their world was buried deep, but it was far from finished. The rebel hideout was a cavernous shell beneath the city's fractured steel skeleton, where muted lights cast long shadows over the cracked concrete floor and scattered remnants of forgotten technology. The stale odor of oil and rust mingled with the faint metallic tang of recycled air. Within this fragile sanctuary, the tension was palpable, thick enough to choke the breath from anyone who dared linger too long. Lyra stood with her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles blanched white, her short-cropped red hair glowing in the flickering light of a battered lantern. Her eyes burned with a fierce intensity, a reflection of the fire that had driven her since the day the city began to crumble. "We can't wait," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. "Every moment we hesitate, the governor tightens his grip. They're slaughtering our people, and all we do is talk. We need to strike back hard and fast." Iran, seated across the table, adjusted his glasses nervously, the thin frame slipping down his narrow nose. His lab coat, worn and stained from days of toil, seemed at odds with the harsh surroundings. "Lyra," he replied, his tone measured but firm, "I understand your anger, but rushing into a battle we're not prepared for will only lead to more deaths. We must be methodical, gather more intelligence, and find the weaknesses in their defenses. If we lose our people now, there may be none left to fight later." The words hung between them, a chasm wide enough to swallow their fragile alliance. Kale watched them both, feeling the weight of every gaze falling upon him. He was the reluctant leader now, thrust into a role he neither sought nor desired. His lean frame was tense, shoulders hunched beneath the patchwork scavenger gear that had become his armor. His dark hair, usually unkempt from months of survival, fell messily over his brow as he rubbed a hand tiredly over his face. "Enough," Kale said quietly, his voice steady but carrying the undercurrent of exhaustion. "This isn't about who's right or wrong, it's about what keeps us alive. We can't afford to fracture now, not when the city is already breaking apart around us." Lyra shot him a glare, but her voice softened. "So what then? We wait for the governor to crush us?" "No," Kale answered. "We find a way to fight smarter, not just harder. Iran's right that we need more information, but we also can't sit still and be slaughtered. We have to balance both." Iran nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "If we coordinate our efforts, combine intelligence gathering with targeted strikes, we might stand a chance." The room fell into a tense silence, each rebel weighing the fragile truce. Outside, the distant rumble of Sky Raiders' engines echoed through the fractured cityscape, a harsh reminder of the dangers pressing in from all sides. The sound vibrated through the metal bones of the floating city, a dreadful herald of the conflicts to come. Kale moved to a battered map spread across the table, fingers tracing the jagged lines of the city's fractured sectors. "We can't afford to lose focus," he said. "Not now. We need to protect the people caught in the crossfire, the innocents who have nowhere else to go." Lyra's fiery gaze softened, though the fire in her eyes remained. "Then we do it together. But if anyone betrays that trust, I won't hesitate to act." Iran's thin lips pressed into a firm line, understanding the gravity behind her words. The fragile alliance was held together by threads of trust, and each rebel's conviction was both their strength and their vulnerability. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of leadership settle more heavily on his shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril not just from the government's forces, but from the fractures within their own ranks. Yet beneath the tension, a spark of hope kindled, a hope that despite their differences, they could forge a future from the ruins. As the distant engines roared louder, signaling an approaching threat, Kale's gaze hardened. "We have no choice but to stand united. For the city, for the earth beneath us." The chapter closed with the rebels preparing for the storm ahead, their fractured loyalties tested, but their resolve unbroken, the fragile alliance teetering on the edge of either salvation or collapse. The rebel hideout was quieter than usual, but the silence was heavy, oppressive. Kale stood at the center of the room, the dim glow of a flickering overhead lamp casting harsh shadows on his weathered face. Around him, faces once filled with hope and defiance were now clouded with suspicion and disbelief. The air smelled faintly of burnt oil and damp metal, a reminder of their precarious existence on the edge of a collapsing world. Kale's voice was steady, but inside turmoil churned. "We have proof," he said, holding up a small data chip, its surface scuffed but containing the truth that could no longer be ignored. "One of us has been feeding information to Governor Ralvik's forces." A sharp intake of breath swept through the group. Lyra's eyes narrowed, fiery as ever, her hands clenched into fists. Iran adjusted his glasses nervously, his usual calm shaken. Even Myra, gentle and steadfast, looked away, the weight of betrayal sinking in. The spy, an unassuming figure who had worked quietly alongside them, now sat motionless, the color drained from their face. No words were exchanged. The evidence was undeniable. The fragile trust that had held the rebels together now lay in ruins. Kale's mind raced. How long had the betrayal lasted? How many plans had been compromised? The answers were as elusive as hope itself. Before they could fully process the revelation, alarms blared, shattering the brief moment of stunned silence. Red emergency lights bathed the hideout as an urgent warning echoed through the rusted corridors. "Sky Guards incoming," Myra shouted, already moving to tend to the wounded. Lyra grabbed her weapons, eyes blazing with fierce determination. "They know where we are. We have to move now." Outside, the skies were a tempest of dark clouds and roaring engines. The rebel skyships, once symbols of defiance, now became desperate vessels of survival. Kale climbed aboard the battered craft, heart pounding as the engines screamed to life. The battle erupted with brutal intensity. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the stormy backdrop. Metal screamed as skyships collided and tore through the air. Jax's raiders, sensing opportunity in the chaos, swooped in, adding to the maelstrom. Lyra fought beside Kale, her short-cropped red hair a streak of fire amidst the smoke and sparks. Her voice cut through the cacophony, sharp commands and fierce encouragement. "Keep formation. Watch the left flank," but the damage was done. The element of surprise was lost, and with it, precious lives. One by one, their skyships faltered, caught in the crossfire of overwhelming forces. Amid the chaos, Kale's mind was a whirlwind of fear and resolve. Every loss was a dagger to his soul, every fallen comrade a reminder of the cost of trust broken. When the battle finally subsided, the rebels gathered beneath the flickering emergency lights of their shattered refuge. The silence was different now, heavier, laden with grief and suspicion. Eyes that once looked to Kale for guidance now questioned his judgment. Whispers of doubt swirled like toxic smoke, threatening to suffocate the fragile hopes that remained. Kale knew the path ahead would be harder than any battle fought in the skies. The real war was just beginning, the war to rebuild trust, to mend fractured hearts, and to find strength in the face of betrayal. Yet even in the depths of despair, a flicker of hope endured. The iron skies above were dark and foreboding, but beneath them, the embers of resistance still glowed, waiting for the breath of conviction to ignite anew. "We survive," Kale whispered to himself, "not because this world is kind, but because we are relentless." And with that, he prepared to lead once more, knowing the cost would be steep, but the cause worth every sacrifice. The night stretched on, heavy with loss and uncertainty, but beneath the shadows, a new chapter was beginning, one that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and the fragile bonds that hold humanity together in the face of annihilation. Kale's gaze lifted to the iron skies, dark and endless. Somewhere beyond the swirling clouds, the future awaited, and he would face it, no matter what it demanded. The storm was far from over. Continued, the rebel council room was a mess of scattered maps and broken equipment, remnants of the chaos that had engulfed them just hours before. Kale sat heavily on a battered metal crate, the weight of leadership pressing down like the poisoned air they breathed. Around him, the faces of those who had survived bore the scars of battle and betrayal alike. Lyra paced, her fiery spirit undimmed even in defeat. "We can't keep running," she said, voice fierce. "Ralvik's spies have us cornered. We need a new plan, something they won't expect." Iran, ever the voice of reason, nodded slowly. "We must assume more spies exist. The leak that led to this attack could be part of a larger network. Our information is compromised." Myra tended quietly to the wounded, her hands gentle yet steady. "Trust is shattered," she murmured. "How do we rebuild when every shadow could hide an enemy?" Kale looked around the room, meeting each gaze. The question echoed within him. Leadership was no longer just about strategy, it was about healing, about bringing broken people back from the edge. "We start by finding the truth," Kale said finally, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We root out the spies, mend our fractures. We fight not just for survival, but for the future we believe in." A tentative nod passed through the group. The road ahead was uncertain, but surrender was not an option. Outside, the iron skies rumbled, a grim reminder that their enemies watched from above. But below, in the hearts of the rebels, a spark of defiance smoldered, ready to ignite once again. Kale stood, feeling the weight of every lost soul and every hope that still lingered. The silent betrayal had cut deep, but it had not broken them. Not yet. And as the first light of dawn crept beneath the heavy clouds, Kale made a silent vow. No matter the cost, He would lead them through the darkness toward whatever dawn awaited beneath the iron skies. The fight was far from over, and the true battle for their world had only just begun. The storm was gathering. The sky trembled first, a low, ominous rumble that rolled across the vast expanse of the floating city like a warning thunderclap. Cale's gaze lifted instinctively from the shattered panel he was scavenging. His breath caught as the distant hum of the city's giant engines faltered, a sinister groan threading through the air. The sections of the metropolis, those colossal iron leviathans suspended above the poisoned earth, shuddered violently, their intricate lifelines of cables and supports straining under invisible forces. Suddenly, a horrendous crack split the air, sharp and final. Cale's heart hammered as he saw a massive segment of the city's lower-tier fracture, a gaping wound tearing through the steel and glass. Screams erupted around him, an unrelenting tide of panic and terror. The ground beneath their feet, once a stable platform in the skies, betrayed them, crumbling and dropping with terrifying speed. Dust and debris clouded the air, blurring the skyline with choking ash. Cale moved without hesitation, instincts honed by years of surviving the city's cruel edges guiding him through the chaos. The sharp tang of burnt ozone and twisted metal filled his nostrils. He dodged falling beams and shattered panels, his scavenger's hands pulling at wreckage to free trapped civilians. "Help! Over here!" A voice pierced the din. Cale followed the cry to a collapsed walkway where a young woman lay pinned beneath a twisted girder. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked with his. He gritted his teeth and heaved the metal away, fingers scraping against sharp edges. The weight lifted, and she gasped, clutching his arm. Nearby, Lyra's voice crackled over a battered comlink. "Cale, I'm en route with the skiff. Hold on to those survivors." Her tone was steady, fierce even, cutting through the turmoil like a beacon. Cale's respect for her courage deepened with every desperate moment. He glanced up just in time to see her skiff slicing through the thick smoke, weaving nimbly between the falling debris and twisted structures. Her red hair was aflame against the gray sky, a symbol of hope amid ruin. The roar of the engines battled with the screams and groans of the breaking city, but Lyra's presence was a promise. They were not yet defeated. In the command chamber high above, Governor Ralvik stood rigid, his sharp eyes narrowed as the chaos unfolded on the holoscreens. His voice was cold steel as he barked orders to his elite sky guards. "Contain the panic. Secure the perimeter. No one leaves without authorization. We cannot afford total collapse." Ralvik's face betrayed a flicker of unease, quickly masked by austere resolve. The city was his dominion, a fragile order he had fought decades to maintain. Yet beneath his unyielding exterior lay a growing dread. The city's failures were accelerating, and with them, the threat to his power. Back on the fractured platforms, Cale's hands were raw and bleeding, but he refused to stop. Each life saved was a victory against the despair threatening to consume them all. He pulled another survivor from the wreckage, a small boy, eyes wide with shock, clutching a battered toy. Cale's voice was gentle despite the chaos. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." The collapse had shattered more than steel. It cracked the very illusion of safety that had held the city's inhabitants captive. Whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire, fueled by the tangible proof that their floating sanctuary was failing. Cale knew this moment would change everything. "We can't keep living like this," he murmured, eyes scanning the horizon where the city's lights flickered uncertainly. "Something has to give." The survivors gathered at makeshift shelters, their faces etched with grief and fear, but also a flicker of determination. Lyra's skiff touched down amid the crowd, and she was already organizing triage with Myra, the medic whose calm presence was a balm against the storm. "We need to move fast," Myra urged, bandaging wounds with practiced hands. "The city's still unstable. Aftershocks could come at any moment." Cale nodded, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. The disaster was a brutal reminder of the stakes. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself. As night fell, the city's fractured silhouette against the darkening sky was a stark testament to fragility. Yet amid the ruins, Kale's resolve hardened. He would lead, not because he sought power, but because no one else could. The first tremors of rebellion had begun, and the iron skies would never be the same. But questions lingered like the smoke in the air. How long could the floating cities hold? And what truths lay buried beneath the poisoned earth, waiting to be uncovered? Kale's gaze drifted downward, toward the hazy, toxic ground far below. The answer might lie there, hidden in darkness, waiting for those brave enough to seek it. The city trembled again, but this time, so did the hearts of its people. Change was coming, and Kale would be at its center. The sky overhead was a bruised canvas of darkening orange and purple, the last light of day bleeding through the fractured expanse of the floating city. Kale crouched low behind a jagged piece of twisted steel, his breath shallow and controlled, each inhale tasting of rust and dust. Beside him, Lyra adjusted the grip on her makeshift rifle, her eyes sharp and wary, scanning the horizon as the distant rumble of engines grew louder by the second. "They're coming," Lyra whispered, her voice taut with urgency. "Sky guards, elite units." Kale nodded, muscles coiling with a mix of fear and determination. The city was a fragile beast, its iron bones creaking under the weight of neglect and decay. Every day brought new threats, but none as imminent as the arrival of Ralvik's enforcers. The governor was tightening his grip, deploying his elite sky guards to snuff out the flickering embers of rebellion before they could flare into a blaze. The roar of jet engines sliced through the thickening air, a piercing sound that set Kale's heart hammering. Shadows darted across the ruined platforms, the silhouettes of government fighters moving with ruthless precision. The rebels were outnumbered and outgunned, but retreat was not an option. "Ready?" Kale muttered, his voice barely audible. Lyra's fierce gaze met his. "Always." They emerged from their cover, weaving through the skeletal remains of machinery and shattered conduits. The city's hollow bones echoed with the distant blasts of pulse weapons and the sharp crackle of comms chatter. Explosions blossomed in the distance, sending showers of sparks raining into the toxic sky. A sky guard jet screamed overhead, its sleek form a blur against the fiery backdrop. Kale felt the wind shift as a volley of pulse blasts tore through the air, striking the platform mere feet away. He shoved Lyra down just in time, the shockwave rattling their bones. "Move," Lyra hissed, dragging Kale toward a narrow passageway between rusted walls. Their boots clattered against the metal grating as they sprinted, the sound swallowed by the chaos around them. Behind, the enforcers pressed forward, their footsteps a relentless tide of oppression. Kale's mind raced, calculating odds and options even as adrenaline surged through his veins. Above the battle, in the cold, sterile command center, Governor Ralvik stood like a statue carved from ice. His sharp features were illuminated by the cold glow of hollow screens displaying the city's fractured zones and rebel positions. The hum of surveillance drones filled the room, an unceasing reminder of his reach. "Increase patrols," Ralvik ordered, voice clipped and commanding. "No quarter. These insurgents threaten the order we've fought to maintain." His advisors nodded, their expressions a mix of fear and obedience. Ralvik's iron will was the fragile glue holding the city's elite together, his belief that control at any cost was the only path to survival. Back in the shadows of the crumbling city, Kale and Lyra found a brief respite. Their breaths came in ragged bursts, faces streaked with grime and sweat. Around them, the distant sounds of battle ebbed and flowed like a storm at sea. "We can't keep running," Kale said, voice low, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. Lyra's jaw tightened. "Then we don't. We fight. For every scrap of sky we still hold." The weight of their choices pressed down on them, yet beneath the exhaustion flickered a stubborn spark of hope. The rebellion was no longer whispered in shadows. It roared across the iron skies with the promise of change. But with every skirmish, the lines between friend and foe blurred, and the cost of defiance grew heavier. As night began to shroud the city in darkness, Kale looked up at the looming silhouette of the floating metropolis, its fractured spires piercing the stars. The battle lines were drawn, and the fight for the future of their world had only just begun. "We survive," Kale vowed, "or we fall together." The echoes of that promise carried through the iron skies, a challenge thrown down in the face of an unforgiving world. And somewhere in the shadows, Governor Ralvik watched, the cold glint of power and fear intertwined in his gaze. The city held its breath, teetering on the edge of chaos. The sun dipped low behind the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the poisoned earth as Kale and Iran stood before the rusted hatch, half buried beneath the cracked, toxic soil. The air was thick with the acrid scent of decay and chemical rot, a bitter reminder of the world they had lost beneath the floating cities. Kale wiped grime from his brow, his fingers trembling slightly as he traced the faded markings on the corroded metal surface. "This has to be it," he murmured, exchanging a glance with Iran, whose thin frame was tense beneath his worn lab coat. Iran nodded, adjusting his cracked glasses as he knelt beside the hatch, producing a rusted crowbar from his pack. The silence around them was oppressive, broken only by the distant groan of the city above and the faint whisper of the poisoned wind through skeletal trees. The hatch resisted their efforts at first, the metal protesting with a harsh screech that echoed unnervingly in the quiet. With a final heave, it gave way, exposing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. Kale flicked on a battered flashlight, the beam slicing through the gloom to reveal cold, steel walls streaked with rust and stained with years of neglect. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mold and forgotten secrets. As they descended, the faint hum of dying electronics greeted them, a ghostly echo of the world that once thrived within these walls. At the bottom, they stepped into a small chamber cluttered with outdated scientific equipment, cracked monitors, and stacks of yellowing documents. Flickering fluorescent lights overhead sputtered to life, casting eerie shadows that danced across faded photographs pinned to the walls, images of lush forests, smiling faces, and machinery humming with promise. But the smiles were ghosts now, memories swallowed by the relentless spread of poison that had consumed the Earth's surface. Iran approached a console, fingers trembling as he brushed dust from a keyboard. This is the research facility," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "The one they tried to erase." Kale scanned the room cautiously, his eyes catching a cracked screen displaying a timeline of experiments and environmental readings. The data was damning. Chemical tests, radiation levels, and coded reports detailing efforts to manipulate the planet's atmosphere, all pointing to a catastrophic failure concealed beneath layers of propaganda. "They knew," Kale said quietly, voice edged with disbelief and fury. "They knew what they were doing to the Earth." Iran swallowed hard, pulling a battered journal from a crate. "I was part of this," he confessed, voice barely audible. "I helped design the atmospheric stabilizers, but something went wrong. The experiments accelerated the poisoning instead of halting it. The government covered it up, blamed natural causes, and kept feeding the floating cities while the surface died." Kale's heart pounded as the weight of the truth settled over him like a shroud. He had suspected corruption, but this betrayal cut deeper than any sky raid or city collapse. The rulers they had resisted were architects of the apocalypse, their hunger for control overriding the survival of the planet itself. "We have to tell them," Kale said, determination hardening his voice. "Everyone needs to know what's beneath their feet." Iran nodded, though his eyes betrayed the torment of a man haunted by his own complicity. "But if they find out, the city will fight to keep this secret. They'll do anything to protect their power." Outside, a distant rumble shook the ground, a grim reminder that the city's foundations were crumbling even as secrets surfaced. Kale glanced upward through a cracked ventilation grate, the steel skeleton of the floating metropolis groaning in protest. "Then we fight," Kale said, fists clenched. "For the Earth. For all of us." Together, they gathered what evidence they could carry, sealing the hatch behind them as the shadows of the bunker swallowed the last flicker of light. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice, but Kale felt a spark of hope ignite within the bleakness. The truth was their weapon now, a beacon in the iron skies, guiding them toward a reckoning long overdue. As they climbed back into the poisoned wasteland, the first distant crack of collapsing steel echoed through the air, a stark herald of the battles to come. Cale's gaze hardened, the weight of history and future pressing upon him in equal measure. The secrets beneath steel were out, and there would be no turning back. The city was dying, but so was the lie. And from the ashes, something new might yet rise. Cale sank down onto the twisted metal frame of the ruined sky platform, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of his scavenger gear. The distant hum of failing generators mingled with the sharp whistle of the wind, cutting through the hollow skeleton of the city's outer edge. His eyes, shadowed and heavy, fixed on the cracked horizon where the poisoned earth stretched endlessly beneath the iron skies. The sky was a dull, sickly gray, the sun a pale ghost behind layers of toxic clouds. The silence around him was thick, an oppressive weight that pressed against his chest. But inside Cale, a storm raged far fiercer. Memories surged unbidden, the screaming alarms of the last sky raid, the blaze that swallowed his family's home, the choking smoke, the desperate hands reaching out before silence swallowed their voices. He shut his eyes tightly, trying to hold back the tide, but the images came anyway. His mother's tear-streaked face, his sister's terrified eyes, the cruel laughter of raiders as they tore through what little sanctuary remained. A bitter taste rose in his throat, and his hands clenched into fists. He was alone here, abandoned by the world and by fate. The weight of loss was a constant ache, a shadow that clung to him no matter how far he fled through the sky ruins. He had learned to survive by shutting down the parts of himself that ached too deeply, but tonight the walls were crumbling. A soft rustling broke the silence. Cale's head jerked up, heart pounding. From the shadows emerged Lyra, her short-cropped red hair catching what little light filtered through the wreckage. Her eyes, fierce and unwavering, met his without hesitation. She stepped closer, the grease-stained fabric of her jumpsuit whispering against the metal floor. "Cale," she said gently, her voice steady but warm, "you don't have to carry it alone." He looked away, swallowing hard. "It's not that simple." "I know," she replied, crouching beside him, "but you're not alone. We all carry scars. And we fight because we remember what we lost." Her words were a lifeline tossed across the chasm of his despair. Slowly, Cale let the tension in his shoulders ease, allowing a flicker of hope to pierce the gloom. For the first time in a long while, he let himself lean on someone else. They sat together in silence, the distant rumble of the city's failing systems, a grim reminder of the fragile world they inhabited. Lyra broke the quiet, her voice low but fierce. "We have a fight ahead, Cale. The city's crumbling and Ralvik's tightening his grip, but we can't let the past chain us. We have to move forward together." Cale met her gaze, the fire in her eyes igniting a spark within his own. "Together," he echoed, a tentative promise. Later, in the dim safety of the rebel safe house, a flickering fire cast long shadows on the walls. Cale and Lyra exchanged stories, not just of battles and losses, but of hopes buried deep beneath the wreckage. Their voices were low, laden with the weight of what had been endured and the fierce determination to reclaim what might still be saved. Lyra spoke of her family, lost to the city's collapse and political betrayal, her words raw but resolute. Cale shared fragments of his own haunted past, the memories he usually kept locked away. In this space, their vulnerabilities forged a bond stronger than steel, a shared purpose that transcended grief. As the fire sputtered low, Cale found himself standing before a shattered window, the toxic horizon stretching endlessly below. The air tasted of ash and decay, but in his chest, a new resolve burned bright. The shadows of the past would not define him. He would lead, not just to survive, but to fight for a future that honored those lost. The iron skies darkened, heavy with the promise of coming storms. But beneath those skies, Cale's heart steeled itself. The battles ahead would be brutal, the sacrifices immense. Yet with Lyra beside him and the rebels rallying, a fragile hope endured, a hope born from the ashes of loss and the courage to face the unknown. He turned away from the window, the weight of his past still present but no longer paralyzing. The time to act was near. The fragile city trembled, and with it, the fate of all who dwelled beneath the iron skies. Kale's journey from haunted survivor to determined leader was just beginning. And as the first distant echoes of rebellion stirred through the crumbling metropolis, Kale knew one thing for certain. The past might cast long shadows, but it was the choices made in the present that would shape the dawn. The underground chamber was thick with unease as the rebels gathered, their faces etched with exhaustion and doubt. Flickering lights cast long shadows on the walls, mirroring the fractures opening within their fragile alliance. Kale stood at the center, a reluctant fulcrum balancing the weight of their hopes and fears. "We can't wait any longer," Lyra snapped, her voice sharp as the red streaks in her hair. "Every day we hesitate, Ralvik tightens his grip. We have the strength to strike now, strike hard and fast. It's our only chance." Iran adjusted his glasses, his gaze calm but resolute. "And risk exposing ourselves before we have all the facts. The government's reach is longer and deadlier than we realize. A premature strike could mean total annihilation. We need to be measured. We need evidence to rally more support." Myra watched silently from the corner, her hands clasped tightly. The scars of recent battles were still fresh, and the thought of internal discord threatened to undo everything they had endured. Kale felt the weight of their words like a physical force pressing down on his chest. His mind raced through endless possibilities, consequences, and the delicate balance between hope and ruin. "We're all fighting for the same thing," he said, voice steady yet weary. "But if we fracture now, the government wins without firing a shot." Lyra's eyes flared, but something softened in her stance. "I just don't want to see more innocent people suffer because we're too cautious." Iran nodded, his fingers tapping nervously against his worn lab coat. "And I don't want to see us wiped out because we acted without a plan." The room fell into a strained silence, the rebels grappling with their own fears and the enormity of their mission. Kale stepped forward, meeting each gaze with quiet determination. "We need a plan that balances risk with action. We expose what we must, but with precision. We protect those who follow us, not just those who fight beside us." He paused, feeling the fragile unity hang by a thread. "This is more than a rebellion. It's a chance to reclaim our world from the lies and the poison. We owe it to the fallen, to the future." The tension didn't vanish, but a tentative understanding flickered in the eyes around him. They were battered, broken, but not beaten. Not yet. Outside, the rumble of the failing city echoed, a grim reminder of the stakes. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but Kale knew the fractures in their alliance had to be mended or they would all fall beneath the iron skies. As the meeting dispersed, Kale lingered in the shadows, the weight of leadership pressing heavily on his shoulders. Myra approached, her touch a soft reassurance. "We'll find a way," she said simply. He nodded, drawing strength from her quiet confidence. "We have to." The night deepened, but within the rebels burned a fragile flame of hope. The battle for the skies and for the truth was far from over, and Kale was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. Yet beneath the surface, the fractures remained, threatening to shatter everything in their wake. And the iron skies watched silently, waiting. The stale air of the underground chamber clung thickly to Iran's skin as he shuffled through the scattered data pads, their flickering holograms casting eerie blue light across the cracked concrete floor. His fingers trembled as they traced the faded schematics of machines designed not to save, but to subjugate, experiments that had accelerated the poisoning of the earth beneath their floating refuge. Kale watched silently from the doorway, the weight of the moment pressing down like the toxic clouds that suffocated the world outside. Iran's voice broke the oppressive quiet, a low confession laced with years of buried guilt. "I was part of this," he said, his eyes not meeting Kale's. "I knew what was happening, what the consequences would be, but I was convinced we could control it, that we were saving humanity by any means necessary." Kale's heart tightened, a mixture of anger and disbelief flashing across his face. "You knew and said nothing?" he demanded, stepping fully into the chamber. "How many lives have been lost because of your silence?" Iran flinched but held firm. "I was trapped, Kale, just like you, just like all of us. But now, with you here, I want to make it right." The two men stood amidst the relics of a doomed past, a fragile bridge forming between the haunted survivor and the remorseful scientist. Iran led Kale to a hidden compartment embedded in the wall, its cold blue light revealing documents and recordings that detailed the government's systematic cover-up of the experiments. Each file deepened the fracture in Kale's trust, yet also fueled his determination to bring the truth to light. Outside, the first drops of rain began to patter against the rusted metal walls, a somber soundtrack to the storm gathering within their hearts. Kale clenched his fists, the scars of loss and betrayal etched into his expression. "This changes everything," he said quietly, "but we can't let it break us." Iran nodded, wiping a tear that had slipped down his cheek. "The price of truth is high," he whispered, "but it's the only way forward." As they prepared to leave the bunker, the distant rumble of thunder echoed through the tunnels, a portent of the battles yet to come. Their pact, forged in pain and resolve, was a fragile beacon of hope in a fractured world. Kale knew the path ahead would demand sacrifices beyond reckoning, but with Iran beside him, the fight for justice had finally begun. The chamber's shadows lengthened as the storm gathered strength, and beneath the iron skies, the fragile threads of rebellion began to weave a new destiny. Kale's gaze hardened, the burden of leadership settling over him like a second skin. The truth was out, and with it, the reckoning that would either save their world or shatter it forever. The night deepened, and with every heartbeat, the price of truth grew heavier, but so did the hope that it might yet redeem them all. The sky darkened over the floating metropolis like a brooding beast ready to strike. Thick, roiling clouds churned with unnatural speed, casting long shadows over the skeletal framework of the sky city. The wind screamed through broken girders and twisted metal, a howl of warning that echoed through the narrow corridors and shattered walkways where Kale now stood. He lifted his gaze, eyes sharp beneath the ragged hood of his scavenger gear. Above, jagged flashes of lightning split the sky, illuminating the fragile, rusting platforms that had been home to so many and now threatened to become tombs. Kale's breath came in measured bursts, steady despite the storm's rising fury. Around him, the remnants of the city creaked and groaned as the tempest tightened its grip. The early warnings had been ignored by the ruling elite, their propaganda machines drowning out the growing panic below. But Kale, now more than a scavenger, more than a survivor, knew the truth. The storm was a harbinger of collapse. He moved swiftly through the cramped tunnels, his boots echoing on steel catwalks slick with rain. The message had come moments before. A section of the eastern platform was breaking loose, trapping dozens beneath fallen beams and twisted cables. Without hesitation, Kale gathered his allies. Lyra waited by the battered hovercraft, her red hair plastered to her head by rain. Her hands danced over controls with practiced ease, eyes narrowed against the storm's sting. Beside her, Myra checked medical supplies in the cramped cabin, her calm demeanor a balm against the chaos. "We don't have much time," Kale said, voice low but firm. "That platform's about to give way completely. We get in, pull out who we can, and get out before it's too late." Lyra nodded, her grip tightening on the controls. "I'll get us as close as the wind allows. Just keep the survivors alive." The craft shuddered as it lifted, buffeted by the storm's relentless assault. Outside, rain hammered the reinforced glass with the force of 1,000 fists, blurring the jagged horizon where lightning danced like wildfire. Kale's hands tightened into fists, memories flashing unbidden. Lost family, shattered homes, betrayals etched into every scar. But there was no room for doubt now. The hovercraft sliced through the turbulent air, dodging debris and surging gusts as the eastern platform came into view, broken, heaving, a dying giant. Trapped figures huddled amid the wreckage, faces pale and desperate. The storm's rage was a living thing, tearing at exposed cables and sending shudders through the ruined structure. "Hold tight," Kale commanded over the comms. "Lyra, steady. Myra, prepare for triage. We'll move fast." The landing was rough, a jarring thud that rattled bones and frayed nerves. Kale leapt from the craft, rain stinging his eyes as he sprinted toward the trapped survivors. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal, punctuated by the distant roar of the storm. Myra was already at work, her hands gentle yet urgent as she tended to a young child with a bleeding arm. Lyra covered their retreat, eyes scanning the skies for threats amid the tempest. Kale's voice cut through the chaos. "This way, we're getting everyone out." Time blurred. Each rescue was a battle against collapse and despair. Beams threatened to fall, cables sparked with dangerous energy, and the platform groaned as if mourning its own demise. Yet, amid the destruction, a fragile hope took root. The final survivor was aboard just as a massive shockwave rippled through the city, sending debris hurtling through the air. The hovercraft lurched violently, but Lyra's steady hands kept them aloft. Kale's heart pounded in his chest as they broke free from the crumbling platform, the storm's howl filling the void behind them. As the craft climbed above the chaos, Kale looked back toward the dark horizon. The storm was far from over, and the city's fragile balance was teetering on the edge of oblivion. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of something stronger than fear: resolve. "We survive," he murmured, "and we fight." The storm might rage, but beneath the iron skies, the embers of rebellion burned brighter than ever. The coming days would test them all, but Kale was ready to face whatever hell the heavens unleashed. Because survival was no longer enough, it was time to reclaim their world. Lightning split the sky again, a jagged scar that illuminated the battered cityscape below. The storm was a living nightmare, but Kale's resolve was steel. The age of scavengers was over. The age of resistance had begun. The sky was a bruised canvas of dark clouds, swollen with the promise of rain and thunder, as Kale and Lyra slipped through the jagged metal skeletons of the upper city. Their battered skiff hummed softly against the turbulent wind, a fragile vessel against the sprawling monolith of the government complex below. Neon lights flickered erratically, casting fractured patterns on steel and glass, while distant sirens wove a discordant lullaby of alarm. Kale tightened his grip on the controls, eyes scanning for the telltale flashes of enemy patrols. Beside him, Lyra's gaze was a razor's edge, her fingers twitching near the holstered pulse rifle strapped across her chest. "This is it," she whispered, voice low but charged. "Once we hit the control hub, there's no turning back." He nodded, the weight of the moment pressing deep into his chest. The rebellion had simmered in shadows for too long. Tonight, they would bring the fight into the heart of the city's oppressors. The skiff dipped sharply, weaving through the skeletal towers like a bird dodging branches. The facility loomed ahead, an imposing fortress of steel and circuitry, veins of glowing conduits pulsing like arteries beneath its surface. Kale's mind raced through the plan: disable communications, cripple surveillance, and buy time for the rebels to mobilize. The city's fragile balance hung on a thread. One false move could send it plummeting into chaos. As they neared the landing bay, a sudden burst of movement snapped their attention skyward. Sleek figures in armored wingsuits spiraled down from the upper echelons, elite sky guards responding with ruthless precision. Their armor gleamed with cold authority, and their weapons crackled with lethal energy. "Sky guards," Lyra hissed, slamming the skiff into a sharp dive. "They're tighter than we thought." The roar of engines and the staccato pulse of laser fire filled the air. Kale maneuvered with desperate agility, weaving through a hailstorm of blazing beams that seared the metal hull. Sparks showered like deadly rain, and the skiff shuddered under the onslaught. "Hold on," Kale shouted, voice barely audible over the chaos. They crashed onto the landing platform in a burst of smoke and screeching metal. Without hesitation, Kale and Lyra vaulted out, weapons drawn, adrenaline surging as alarms blared a cacophony of impending doom. Inside the labyrinthine corridors, the air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt circuitry and cold metallic tang. Kale led the charge toward the mainframe room, fingers already itching to breach the security protocols. Every step echoed with urgency, the city's fate balanced precariously on their success. "Cover me," Kale commanded, voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. Lyra took position at the entrance, her pulse rifle sweeping in precise arcs, dispatching guards with ruthless efficiency. The clash of weapons reverberated through the halls, punctuated by the sharp crackle of energy discharges and the shouts of combatants. Sweat beaded on Kale's brow as he interfaced with the terminal, fingers flying over the holographic keys. Lines of code scrolled past, a digital battlefield where every second counted. "Almost there," he muttered, tension coiling tight in his chest. Suddenly, the building trembled violently, a distant explosion rocking the structure. Dust rained from the ceiling, and warning lights flashed red in a frantic strobe. "Time's running out," Lyra called, firing at a squad breaching the corridor. With a final keystroke, Kale forced the mainframe into lockdown, severing surveillance feeds and crippling communication arrays. The city's iron grip faltered, and a ripple of chaos spread through the control center. "Mission accomplished," Kale breathed, turning to Lyra. But the moment of triumph was shattered by the thunderous collapse of a nearby catwalk. The metal groaned and twisted as chunks of the facility gave way, sending sparks and debris cascading like a deadly waterfall. "Move," Lyra shouted, grabbing Kale's arm. They leapt onto the trembling catwalk, hearts pounding with raw resolve amid the chaos. The acrid scent of burning circuits mingled with the cold metallic taste of fear, but neither faltered. Behind them, the facility blazed with destruction, a stark testament to the price of rebellion. Outside, the sky roared with the fury of an impending storm, as the first shots of an open insurgency echoed beneath the iron skies. The fragile balance of the floating city had shattered, and the reckoning had begun. Kale's eyes met Lyra's, a silent vow passing between them. Whatever the cost, they would fight to reclaim their world. But deep within the shadows, Governor Ralvik's gaze narrowed, his austere features hardening with resolve. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The city trembled on the brink, and the battle for its soul was only just beginning. The air inside the rebel hideout was thick with unease, the low hum of failing machinery blending with the murmurs of restless voices. Kale stood near the entrance, his gaze sharp beneath furrowed brows, scanning the faces of those who had once been his closest allies. Each pair of eyes held shadows, whispers of doubt, fear, and suspicion that stretched like cracks through the fragile solidarity they had fought so hard to build. "We can't afford fractures now," Kale said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Not when the city's breaking apart all around us." But his words fell on ears clouded by uncertainty. The recent losses had left raw wounds, and the discovery of betrayal within their ranks only deepened the chasms. Whispers spread fast: who had sold them out? Who had led Governor Ralvik's forces to their doorstep during the last supply run? Kale knew the answer, but hesitated to name the traitor, knowing the consequences that truth would unleash. The walls, patched with scavenged metal plates and flickering neon strips, seemed to close in as accusations grew louder. Lyra stood beside him, her fiery red hair a beacon of defiance amid the gloom. Her jaw was set, eyes blazing with the pain of loss and the stubborn hope that still burned inside her. "We need to act," she urged. "If we don't root out the rot, we'll all fall." Kale nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The weight of leadership pressed down harder than ever. He had to be the one to face the betrayer, to draw a line between survival and destruction. Suddenly, the ground shuddered beneath them, a violent skyquake rocking the floating city as metal groaned and alarms blared. The fragile metropolis, already on the brink, convulsed violently, sending the rebels scrambling for cover. The air filled with the acrid scent of ozone and burning circuitry as sparks showered from exposed conduits. "Move," Kale shouted, grabbing a struggling recruit and pulling her to safety behind a reinforced bulkhead. The chaos outside mirrored the turmoil within. Every tremor was a reminder that their sanctuary was as unstable as their trust. As the quake subsided, the rebels gathered once more, shaken but unbroken. In the flickering light, Kale found Myra tending to the wounded, her hands sure despite the pandemonium. The medic's calm resolve was a rare balm amid the storm, her presence a fragile thread holding them together. Later, in the quiet that followed, Kale sought out the betrayer. The confrontation was tense, held beneath the cold glow of flickering neon lights that cast long shadows on the cracked concrete floor. The trader's eyes darted nervously, guilt and fear warring within. Why? Kale's voice was low but edged with bitter disappointment. Why risk everything we've fought for? The answer came in a choked whisper, a mixture of desperation, coercion, and fractured loyalty. The revelation cut deep, shaking Kale's faith not only in others, but in his own judgment. This fracture within their ranks threatened to unravel more than just their plans. It threatened their very survival. Yet as painful as it was, Kale knew that from this crucible, a stronger resolve must emerge. He gathered the remaining rebels, their faces hardened by loss but united in purpose. "We move forward," he declared, voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "We fight for those who can't, for the earth beneath us, poisoned but still alive, for the future we must build together." The road ahead was uncertain, lined with shadows of betrayal and the ever-present threat of collapse. But in that moment, beneath the iron skies, Kale embraced the burden of leadership with a fierce determination. The collapse within their ranks was a wound, deep and raw, but it would not be the end. As the neon lights flickered and the city groaned once more, Kale's mind raced ahead to the battles coming, the sacrifices needed, and the fragile hope that still flickered amid the ruin. The line between heroism and sacrifice blurred, but he was ready to walk it, no matter the cost. The story of survival was far from over. The dense, toxic clouds churned overhead as Kale gripped the controls of the battered sky skiff, sweat prickling beneath the grime that coated his skin. The distant thunder of explosions rolled through the air, a grim soundtrack to the chaos unfolding in the skies above the floating cities. Beside him, Lyra's hands worked deftly over the navigation panel, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into the lines of her face. "They're coming fast," she muttered, voice taut with urgency. Jax's raiders spotted a supply convoy moving low. "If they hit it, we lose our ammo for sure." Kale's jaw clenched. The supply lines were the lifeblood of the rebellion, fragile threads holding together their desperate fight against Governor Ralvik's tightening grip. But now, with Jax's ruthless pirates exploiting every crack in the city's defenses, survival felt more precarious than ever. "We can't let them take it," Kale said, voice low but fierce. "Set course. We intercept." The skiff surged forward, slicing through the acrid haze as the sound of engines grew louder, a chorus of menace in the sky. Ahead, the jagged silhouettes of raider ships appeared, black arrows streaking toward the convoy below. The convoy's slow-moving transports, laden with supplies and guarded by a handful of battered fighters, seemed helpless against the sudden onslaught. Lyra's fingers danced over the controls, weaving the skiff through the chaos. "They're fast, but we've got the element of surprise. Hold on." Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers around them, fire and metal raining down as the clash erupted. Kale felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the sharp focus that came when life balanced on a knife's edge. He fired the skiff's mounted pulse cannon, beams slicing through raider hulls, while Lyra maneuvered expertly to avoid the retaliatory blasts. Despite their efforts, the raiders' ferocity was overwhelming. One transport erupted in a ball of flame, debris spiraling into the clouds. Screams echoed faintly through the comms, a haunting reminder of the stakes. "We need to fall back," Lyra shouted, voice cracking with desperation. "We can't hold them all." Kale hesitated, eyes darting to the burning wreckage. Retreat felt like surrender, but the lives of his crew and the fragile hope of the rebellion depended on survival. With a sharp nod, he banked the skiff around a jagged metal spire, evading a volley of missiles. The retreat was chaotic, the sky thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. Back at the rebel safe house, the atmosphere was heavy with exhaustion and tension. Myra moved quietly among the injured, her hands steady as she applied bandages and whispered words of comfort. The flickering lantern light cast long shadows on the walls, mirroring the uncertainty that gripped them all. Kale entered the room, his face drawn but resolute. Lyra followed, cheeks flushed from adrenaline. "We lost too many," Kale said, voice rough, "but we held the line." Myra looked up, eyes bright despite the fatigue. "Every life saved is a victory, we keep fighting." Outside, the war in the skies raged on, factions splintered, alliances fragile, the city's fate hanging in the balance. Kale knew the battles would only grow fiercer, the cost of survival steeper. Yet beneath the iron skies, amid the fractured ruins of this broken world, a stubborn flame of hope endured. The next assault came without warning. Jax's raiders struck a rebel outpost perched on the edge of a floating platform, their black ships slicing through the mist like predators. Kale and Lyra scrambled aboard their skiff, the roar of engines blending with the cries of alarms and the staccato burst of pulse weapons. "They're aiming for the civilian sectors," Lyra said grimly. "If they breach the defenses, it's massacre." Kale's heart pounded. Protecting innocents was no longer just a moral imperative, it was the fragile thread that held their cause together. The sky exploded in fire and steel. Kale dove into the heart of the battle, weaving through enemy fire, his every movement a desperate bid to outmaneuver death. Lyra's voice crackled through the comms, directing fighters, coordinating strikes. The dance of destruction was brutal and unrelenting. Amid the chaos, Kale spotted Jax's flagship, a towering, blackened hulk bristling with weapons. With grim determination, he steered the skiff in pursuit, weaving through debris and fire. The final confrontation came atop a precarious floating platform, where Kale faced Jax in a tense standoff. The sky darkened with smoke and ash, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning metal. "You think you can stop me?" Jax snarled, eyes gleaming with ruthless ambition. "I have to," Kale replied, voice steady despite the storm raging around them. "For everyone who can't fight back." Their clash echoed the war, tearing the skies apart, brutal, personal, and charged with the desperate hope of survival. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds with blood-red streaks, the outcome of their battle remained uncertain. But in the heart of the storm, Kale understood one truth. The hidden war raging above the poisoned earth was far from over, and the fragile hope of a new dawn depended on their courage to fight through the darkness. The skies trembled with the promise of more battles to come, and Kale braced himself for the relentless fight that lay ahead. The heavy steel door groaned as Kale pushed it open, a reluctant barrier yielding to the sharp edge of desperation and hope. Beyond lay the bunker, an underground tomb swallowed by darkness and dust, relics of a past long buried beneath layers of lies and poison. Kale's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing rusted consoles and tangled cables that whispered of forgotten experiments. Beside him, Iran adjusted his glasses, his breath shallow, eyes wide with the weight of what they might uncover. "We need to be quick," Kale muttered, stepping carefully over broken debris. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city above, the fragile iron giant that teetered on the brink of collapse. Each step deeper into the bunker was a descent into the heart of the government's darkest secrets. Iran's fingers danced over a cracked terminal, coaxing it to life. A flickering hologram burst forth, a timeline etched across the void, charts bleeding data on environmental toxins, accelerated decay, and failed recovery attempts. This wasn't just negligence," Iran whispered, voice trembling. "It was deliberate. They accelerated the poisoning to control the surface, to justify the floating cities." Kale's jaw tightened. Memories of his lost family, the sky raids, the crumbling city, all pieces of a puzzle that now revealed a sinister design. Ralvik's regime sacrificed the Earth to keep their power. Their search intensified, rummaging through folders and data cores, pulling threads of a conspiracy that stretched back decades. Each revelation sparked a new flame of anger and sorrow. Yet, amid the despair, a sliver of hope flickered. The truth was a weapon. Suddenly, muffled voices echoed down the corridor. Kale froze, signaling Iran to hide the data. The footsteps approached, a reminder that enemies lurked not only in the skies but in the shadows beneath. They exchanged a grim glance. Time was running out. With hurried hands, Kale grabbed a damaged data core, its surface scratched and worn but vital. They sealed the door behind them, the bunker's secrets locked away once more. As they emerged into the dying light of the city, the sprawling ruins below, and the iron skies above framed their solemn vow to unveil the truth and reclaim the Earth, no matter the cost. Kale's mind raced. The path ahead was fraught with peril. Revealing this truth could ignite a war that might shatter what remained of humanity's fragile sanctuary. But silence was a death sentence for the lost world beneath their feet. "We have what we need," Iran said softly. "Now we fight not just for survival, but for justice." Kale nodded, the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders. The iron skies darkened, but beneath them, a spark of rebellion kindled, one that could either save their world or doom it forever. The chapter closes with Kale and Iran preparing to transmit their findings to the rebels, the first tremors of an uprising that will shake the foundations of the floating cities and the very future of Earth itself. The acrid scent of smoke hung thick in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of burnt metal and scorched earth. Kale crouched low behind a twisted girder, his breath ragged, eyes scanning the horizon where the broken silhouette of the floating city shivered under assault. Explosions rippled through the distance, each blast a cruel reminder of how precarious their existence truly was. Beside him, Lyra's nimble fingers tightened around the grip of her makeshift rifle, her fiery hair catching the faint glow of scattered fires. "They're pushing harder," she muttered, voice tight but steady. "We can't hold much longer like this." Kale nodded, every muscle taut with exhaustion and resolve. "We don't have a choice. We fight or we fall." It was more than a battle for territory. It was a war for their future, fragile and uncertain as the iron skies above. The rebels' makeshift stronghold was a maze of scavenged metal and patched tarps, a testament to human tenacity amid ruin. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with urgency. Myra moved swiftly between cots, her hands steady and practiced, as she treated wounds that ranged from ragged cuts to deep burns. Her face, marked by fatigue and fierce determination, rarely betrayed the exhaustion she must have felt. "Keep pressure here," she instructed softly. "He's losing too much blood. We don't have much time." A young fighter winced, clutching a shattered arm, eyes wide with pain and fear. Myra offered a brief, reassuring smile. "You're going to make it. We all are." Her words were fragile lifelines in a sea of despair. Elsewhere, the faint glow of a cracked hollow screen illuminated Iran's pale face. He leaned closer, fingers trembling slightly as he pieced together fragments of corrupted data salvaged from an abandoned government archive. "There," he whispered, pointing to a schematic that showed a collapsing energy grid beneath the city. "This is why the cities are failing. It's worse than we thought." Kale stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "And Ralvik knows this, doesn't he?" Iran nodded grimly. "He's been hiding it, hoping to maintain control even as everything crumbles, but the truth can't be buried forever." The weight of that knowledge settled heavily between them. Yet despite the bleakness, a spark of determination ignited. "Then we expose it," Kale said, voice low but fierce, "for the people who can't fight anymore, for those we've lost." Night deepened outside, casting long shadows over the battered city. Around a smoldering fire, Kale, Lyra, Iran, and a handful of rebels gathered. Their faces were marked by soot and scars, eyes reflecting the flickering flames and the fragile hope that still flickered inside their hearts. "We're broken," Lyra said quietly, "but not defeated." Kale met her gaze, a faint smile touching his lips despite the heaviness pressing down on them all. "This bond we have, it's our strength. We'll rebuild from the ashes." Myra, standing nearby, nodded in agreement, her voice steady despite the toll the fight had taken. "Every life saved, every secret uncovered brings us closer. We're not just surviving, we're fighting to reclaim what was lost." The fire crackled, the iron sky above dark and foreboding, but beneath it, the rebels found a moment of solidarity. Their bonds, forged in fire and blood, would carry them through the battles to come. The night was long and the road ahead uncertain, but together they dared to hope. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Kale's thoughts raced. The losses they had suffered were steep, but the cause was just. The fragile hope they nurtured was a beacon in the gathering darkness, a promise that the iron skies might yet shelter a reborn world. Yet, even as the new day broke, shadows loomed. The government's grip tightened, and ruthless enemies gathered strength. Kale knew the coming days would test everything they stood for, but for now, there was a moment to breathe and to prepare. The bonds forged in fire would be their shield, and their fight was only just beginning. The dawn broke reluctantly over the fractured expanse of the floating cities, its brittle light casting long shadows across the battered metal skeletons of sky platforms that still clung stubbornly to existence. From his vantage point atop the reclaimed platform, Kale surveyed the horizon, a jagged silhouette of iron and cloud, where the remnants of a world long lost drifted uncertainly against a toxic sky. The air was sharp with the tang of ozone and burnt circuitry, a reminder of the fierce battles waged just hours before. Around him, the tired but exhilarated voices of his comrades rose in a cautious celebration. The platform, once a symbol of Governor Ralvik's iron grip, now bore the marks of rebellion, torn flags replaced by hastily sewn banners, radios crackling with messages of hope and defiance. Kale's heart beat heavy, weighed equally by triumph and the fresh wounds scattered among his people. He knew the cost this victory demanded. The platform was more than a prize. It was a beacon, a tangible shift in power that could ignite a larger flame of resistance or invite a crushing retaliation. Lyra approached, her short-cropped red hair dusted with the grime of battle, hands stained with grease as she pored over the damaged communication arrays. "We're not out of the woods yet," she murmured, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. "But this gives us a voice again. We can reach more than just whispers now." Kale nodded, feeling the fragile weight of leadership settle more firmly on his shoulders. "We hold this, we push harder, but we protect the people. Every life counts." Inside the cramped control room, the soft hum of flickering hollow screens illuminated Iran's gaunt face. Thin fingers traced a map etched with routes between city sectors, his glasses catching the pale blue light. The scientist's voice was low but urgent as he spoke of the regime's inevitable response. "Ralvik won't let this stand. He's already mobilizing elite guards. We must prepare for a storm that could break us if we're not ready." Kale's gaze hardened. Knowledge was their weapon, and Iran's revelations were both a shield and a burden. "We'll face whatever comes," he said. Together. Below, in the makeshift infirmary, Myra moved with practiced grace. Her hands were steady as she dressed wounds, her voice a calm anchor amid the metallic clangs and distant echoes of ongoing skirmishes. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the harsh metallic tang of blood, a stark reminder of the rebellion's cost. She looked up briefly, catching Kale's eye through the narrow doorway. Their silent exchange carried more weight than words, a shared understanding of sacrifice and hope. Outside, the once distant roar of engines grew louder, shadows shifting as loyalist forces began their counterattack. The rebels braced themselves, the taste of victory tempered by the grim knowledge that the fight was far from over. Kale's mind flashed to the faces of those lost and those yet to come. Every choice now held the fragile balance between survival and extinction. Yet amid the tension, a fierce hope burned, a stubborn ember refusing to be snuffed out beneath iron skies. As the first volleys of the renewed assault shook the platform, Kale steadied himself. "Hold the line," he commanded, voice cutting through the chaos. "For the earth beneath us and the skies we fight to reclaim." The turning tide had begun, but the price of rebellion was steep, and the journey toward a new dawn was only just unfolding. The fractured city hung on a precarious edge, its massive iron girders groaning softly beneath the weight of 1,000 lives teetering between survival and oblivion. Kale stood alone on the jagged rim of a fractured sky platform, the wind tugging at his rough scavenger gear, carrying with it the acrid scent of burning metal and decay. Below, the sprawling metropolis of floating cities stretched out, a maze of twisted steel and shattered glass, struggling to cling to the last breath of a poisoned earth. Alarms wailed in the distance, their shrill cries swallowed by the gathering storm clouds that darkened the horizon. The sky, once a vast expanse of endless blue, now bore the scars of humanity's hubris. Cracks of lightning, tracing the brittle edges of iron and smoke, rising from distant fires. Kale's gaze drifted to the fractured skyline, his mind a tempest of doubt and determination. The secret they had uncovered, the buried truth beneath the toxic soil, was a weight heavier than any physical burden. It was the truth about the Earth's poisoning, the catastrophic experiment that had doomed the surface and forced humanity to flee skyward. Yet that truth was also a bomb, capable of detonating the fragile peace that held the floating cities together. He turned from the precipice and made his way to the rebel war room, a dim chamber carved from the skeleton of an old maintenance bay. Flickering holoscreens cast pale light on the faces gathered around a battered table. Lyra paced back and forth, her fiery red hair a stark contrast against the shadows, while Iran stood silently, fingers pressed to his lips, eyes tired yet sharp beneath thin-rimmed glasses. "We can't keep hiding," Lyra said, her voice low but fierce. "The people deserve to know. If we don't act now, the cities will collapse anyway, and then what?" She slammed a fist against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Iran shook his head slowly. "Revealing everything will cause panic. The government will use that chaos to tighten its grip. We risk losing everything we've fought for." Kale rubbed his forehead, the weight of their words pressing down on him like the thick, poisoned air from the surface. "If the truth comes out," he said quietly, "there's no telling what could happen. We could spark a revolution or a massacre. The line between hope and despair is razor-thin." Their argument was interrupted by a sharp buzz from a communication terminal. Kale activated it, revealing the austere office of Governor Ralvik. The man sat alone, his sharp features etched with cold calculation as he surveyed the city through surveillance feeds. The sterile glow of his command center cast long shadows, symbolizing the oppressive control he wielded. Ralvik's voice crackled over the line, calm but laced with menace. "You tread dangerous ground, Kale. Expose the truth, and you will watch the cities burn. I will not allow chaos to destroy all we have built." Kale stared at the screen, the governor's threat hanging in the air like the ominous clouds outside. The choice was his alone: to expose the hidden horrors beneath the poisoned earth, risking societal collapse and widespread death, or to maintain the fragile order, sacrificing truth for survival. As night fell, Kale found himself back atop a quiet rooftop. The city's iron skies stretched above him, streaked with distant, flickering stars. The cool night air was a balm to his racing thoughts. The silence around him was profound but not peaceful, an uneasy calm before the storm. He closed his eyes, memories of lost family, burned cities, and sky raids flickering through his mind like ghosts. The faces of those he had failed, and those who still counted on him, weighed heavily on his soul. He understood now that leadership was not about certainty, but the courage to choose when the path was shrouded in darkness. The city below breathed and trembled, caught in the balance between destruction and renewal. Kale's fingers clenched into fists as resolve hardened within him. Whatever his decision, it would echo through the iron skies and poisoned earth for generations to come. With dawn approaching, Kale opened his eyes and whispered to the silence, "We will face the truth, because survival without hope is no life at all." The first rays of light pierced the horizon, casting a fragile glow over the fractured city, the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's desperate struggle beneath the iron skies. The iron sky groaned and shuddered like a beast wounded beyond repair. Flickers of red and orange flared through the dense, choked clouds above as massive sections of the floating city began to splinter and fall, collapsing into the poisoned atmosphere below with earth-shaking reverberations. Kale gripped the controls of the battered skycraft, sweat slicking his palms despite the chill of the high altitude. Beside him, Lyra's eyes were sharp, scanning the chaos as metal debris rained down like deadly hail. "Hold steady," Kale barked, voice strained but resolute. "We have to reach the command chamber before it's too late." The sky was alive with the roar of collapsing steel and the desperate cries of those trapped in the crumbling metropolis. Fires burned unchecked, their acrid smoke twisting upward and obscuring the once vibrant horizon. Below, The poisoned earth writhed beneath the floating city's failing supports, a grim reminder of the world humanity had abandoned and yet still depended upon. Kale's mind raced, memories of past losses flooding through the maelstrom. The faces of his fallen family, of friends and comrades lost to sky raids and city collapses, burned behind his eyes. But there was no time for mourning. Survival demanded action, and now, a reckoning. As they neared the governor's stronghold, a vast steel fortress perched precariously on the city's highest segment, the skycraft was rocked violently. Lyra cursed under her breath, expertly maneuvering through the twisting wreckage. "They're sending sky guards after us," she said grimly. "Ralvik won't let us expose him without a fight." Kale nodded. "Then we'll give him one." Inside the command chamber, Governor Ralvik stood unmoving, the cold light of failing systems casting deep shadows across his sharp-featured face. The man who had ruled the floating cities with an iron fist now faced the inevitable collapse of his empire. Alarms blared, echoing the city's dying heartbeat, but Ralvik's voice was steady as he spoke into the comms, refusing to surrender. "Kale," the governor's voice crackled through the static, thick with disdain. "You think you can upend the order I've built? Without me, there is only chaos. You will destroy us all." "Maybe," Kale replied, voice firm. "But your order has already destroyed the Earth. It's time to let it fall." The battle that followed was brutal and unrelenting. Sky guards swarmed in mechanized wings, their sleek armor gleaming even as the city around them crumbled. Kale and Lyra fought with desperation born of countless losses, weaving through fire and steel, dodging missiles and shattered platforms. Jax's raiders appeared amidst the chaos, their wild assaults complicating the conflict, but also striking at Ralvik's forces in a bitter twist of fate. Below, in a makeshift medical bay, Iran and Myra worked tirelessly. The air was thick with smoke and antiseptic, punctuated by the groans of the wounded and the soft hum of life-saving machinery. Myra's hands trembled but did not falter, stitching wounds and calming panicked breaths. Iran's scientific mind raced even as fatigue threatened to overwhelm him. Every casualty was a reminder of the stakes, the future of a world still clinging to life. On the shattered skyline, Kale finally confronted Governor Ralvik atop a precarious platform, the inferno of the collapsing city painting their silhouettes against the darkening sky. Thunder rolled overhead, a storm breaking loose as if nature itself mourned the end of an era. "It's over, Ralvik," Kale said, eyes locked on the governor's steely gaze. "Your lies, your tyranny, it ends tonight." Ralvik's face twisted, a mixture of rage and something deeper, regret perhaps. "Order is necessary, Kale. Without it, you're nothing but chaos." "Maybe," Kale replied, stepping forward as the first drops of rain began to fall. "But I'd rather build something new from the ruins than live under your shadow forever." Their clash was fierce, a violent dance atop the edge of oblivion. Metal screeched and cracked beneath their feet, the city failing around them as thunder cracked like a judge's gavel. Each strike, each parry, was weighted with the fate of humanity itself. As the storm broke fully, washing away the dust and blood, Kale landed the final blow, sending Ralvik sprawling. The governor's empire was no more. Yet as Kale looked out over the ruined cityscape, he knew this was not the end, but a beginning. The fragile hope of renewal flickered in the rain, a challenge to a wounded world. "We've survived the fall. Now we have to survive what comes next," Kale murmured, turning to the battered but unbroken rebels gathering behind him. The iron skies darkened, but beneath them, the first stirrings of a new dawn began to glow. The roar of collapsing steel echoed through the broken city, drowning out the cries of the fallen as Kale's victory rippled through the floating ruins. Yet even in triumph, uncertainty loomed. The poisoned earth below beckoned, a silent challenge to those brave enough to reclaim it. Kale's hand tightened around the worn patchwork of his scavenger gear. The battle had been won, but the war for survival was just beginning. "To the surface," he whispered, "we rebuild from the ashes," and beneath the iron skies, life stirred anew. The sky hung heavy above the fractured remains of the floating city, a dull gray mass pressing against the horizon, threatening rain yet offering none. Beneath its oppressive weight, the survivors gathered on the cracked concrete of what was once a bustling platform, now a jagged scar in the sky. Soot clung to their skin, mingling with tears that traced silent paths down tired faces. The air was thick with ash, swirling in the cold wind that whispered through broken steel beams and shattered glass. Cale stood at the edge of the platform, his lean frame silhouetted against the dimming light. The orange haze of dusk filtered through the poisoned atmosphere, casting long shadows that stretched across the ruins like dark fingers reaching into the past. His dark hair was tousled, and his scavenger gear bore fresh stains of smoke and dust. He breathed deeply, the acrid taste of destruction filling his lungs, and closed his eyes briefly to gather the shattered pieces of his resolve. Around him, voices murmured, soft words of sorrow, fragments of memories, and tentative hopes. Lyra paced nearby, her short-cropped red hair catching the last light as she spoke quietly with Iran, their faces drawn and serious. The worn map spread before them was peppered with notes and hastily drawn lines, marking safe zones, supply caches, and potential routes down to the Earth's surface. Their conversation was a careful dance of urgency and caution, a fragile collaboration born out of necessity. Myra moved with practiced care among the wounded, her hands steady even as exhaustion shadowed her face. She whispered reassurances, tending to cuts and burns, her presence a balm against the harshness of their reality. The cramped shelter was dimly lit by flickering lanterns, the shadows dancing across the walls as if echoing the turmoil within each soul. The uprising had left scars deeper than any physical wound, the loss of friends and enemies alike, the betrayal and the heartbreak. Yet amid the ruins, a new understanding took root. The regime's fall had opened a wound in the sky, but also a door. Cale knew that the true battle was only beginning. The Earth below, poisoned and forgotten, waited. The survivors' future lay not in the fragile safety of the floating cities, but in reclaiming the ground beneath their feet. His thoughts drifted to the hidden bunker, the secret truths unearthed, and the sacrifices made. He recalled the faces of those lost, friends, foes, innocents caught in the crossfire. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on him, a mantle he had not sought but could no longer refuse. As night deepened, the group's murmurs grew softer, fading into a tentative silence filled only by the distant creak of settling metal and the occasional crackle of a dying fire. Stars, dimmed by the ever-present haze, flickered faintly overhead, a reminder of the vastness beyond their fragile world. Cale stepped forward, raising his voice to break the hush. "We have lost much," he said, "but we have not lost ourselves. The Earth waits. We will reclaim it not as conquerors, but as caretakers together." A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the crowd. It was not a promise of easy victory, but a pledge of resilience. The ashes of the old world swirled around them, carrying echoes of pain and hope alike. Under the iron skies and poisoned earth, humanity's next chapter was being written, not in the shadows of collapse, but in the fragile light of renewal. And somewhere deep within, Cale knew that the true test of survival was only just beginning. The ground beneath Cale's boots was different now. Not just the familiar harsh, cracked surface etched with the scars of centuries-old devastation, but a place where life dared to creep back. He stood on the ridge overlooking the settlement they'd built, small, fragile, but unmistakably alive. The first sprouts of green had pushed through patches of carefully tended soil, a testament to the resilience of nature, and more importantly, of those who refused to surrender. Around him, the survivors moved with purpose. Lyra, her fiery hair catching the weak sunlight, directed a group clearing away burned-out remnants of old machinery. Their voices were low, but filled with a quiet urgency. This was no mere camp. It was the seed of a future. Cale knelt to inspect one of the patches where native plants had been replanted. The soil was still heavy with poison, but Iran's treatments had begun to neutralize the worst toxins. The scientist knelt beside him, holding a small vial of amber liquid. "It's slow," Iran admitted, "but measurable. The microbes we introduced are breaking down some of the contaminants. It's not much yet, but it's a start." Kale nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. Every day counts. The sky above was a dull iron gray, the floating cities a distant silhouette, still humming with unstable energy. The once mighty metropolises, now crumbling, barely clung to the poisoned atmosphere they had once ruled. Below, life was fragile, but it was life nonetheless. Lyra approached, wiping dirt from her hands. The engineers are working on water purification systems. If we can get clean water flowing, it'll change everything. Kale looked toward the horizon, the faint glimmer of a riverbed long thought dead. Then we keep pushing, no matter what. As evening fell, the survivors gathered around a fire. Myra moved among them, tending to wounds, soothing fears, offering medical aid with gentle hands. The warmth of the fire was a stark contrast to the cold metal and poisoned earth that defined their world. Stories were shared of loss, of battles fought, but also of dreams for a day when the earth might breathe again. Kale listened, occasionally sharing memories of his own losses. The weight of command pressed heavily on him, but in these moments he saw the reason for it all. "We're not just surviving," he said softly, "we're reclaiming." The night deepened, and the stars, faint though they were, shimmered through the polluted sky. Somewhere above, the floating cities groaned, their iron spires flickering with failing lights. But down here, on the poisoned ground, a different story was unfolding. Iran crouched beside a small patch of earth glowing faintly with bioluminescent moss they had introduced. "This," he whispered, "is the beginning of healing." Kale smiled, the weight of the past mingling with the fragile promise of tomorrow. They had lost so much, but here, beneath the iron skies, they were planting seeds of renewal. And from these seeds, a new world might grow. Yet, even as hope blossomed, Kale knew the dangers were far from over. The political powers still in the floating cities would not relinquish control easily. Raiders like Jax lurked in the shadows, waiting for any sign of weakness. Every victory came tethered with peril. But for now, as dawn broke over the scarred land, the survivors stood united. They would fight, build, and endure because the earth beneath their feet deserved a second chance. And so did they. Kale's gaze hardened with resolve. The journey ahead was long, but the first steps had been taken. The seeds of renewal had been sown. "Tomorrow," he said to Lyra, who stood beside him, "we take back our home." And beneath the iron skies, the poisoned earth whispered back, promising to heal if given time and care. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to claim. With the first light of morning casting long shadows across the reborn soil, Kale felt the weight of history pressing down, but also the lift of possibility. The reclamation had begun, and nothing would be the same again. The iron skies above might still threaten collapse, but down here, life stirred anew. And with life came hope. Kale's story was far from over. The fight for the Earth's soul had only just begun. As the survivors prepared for the day ahead, a distant rumble echoed from the skies, a reminder that the old world's dangers still loomed. Yet beneath it all, the Earth breathed, and so did their resolve. They would endure, they would rebuild, they would reclaim, and beneath the iron skies, the seeds of renewal took root. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the sharp tang of rusted metal as Kale and Lyra pushed through the tangled overgrowth of what remained of the old city. Beneath their feet, cracked concrete jutted unevenly from the ground, swallowed partially by creeping vines and moss that whispered of time's slow reclamation. The sky above was a hazy blue, filtered through the dense canopy that had grown wild since the fall of the floating cities. Somewhere beneath the foliage, a faint hum thrummed, a low, steady pulse that beckoned them deeper into the ruins. Kale paused, brushing a strand of dark hair from his eyes, his gaze fixed on a faint glow emanating from beneath a collapsed archway. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, her short-cropped red hair catching the dappled light. "It's coming from down there. Whatever it is, it's still alive." With careful steps, they descended into the shadowed hollow, the undergrowth crunching softly beneath their boots. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the cracked stones as they approached a chamber half buried by debris. There, nestled in the ruins, was a device unlike any they had seen, a relic from Earth's forgotten past, its surface etched with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly against the grime. Iran was already there when they arrived, crouched beside the artifact with his glasses fogged and lab coat smeared with dirt. His thin fingers traced the inscriptions with reverence. "This is more than just a machine," he murmured, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and urgency. "If we can harness this technology, it could be the key to purifying the soil, to healing what's been poisoned." Kale crouched beside him, swallowing a lump of disbelief. For years, they had scoured the surface for scraps, for hope, and here it lay dormant, waiting. But the wild was unforgiving. As Kale reached out to touch the device, a sudden snap of vines startled them all. Kale jerked back, a shallow cut blossoming on his forearm. Myra, ever vigilant, was at his side in an instant, her hands gentle as she cleaned the wound. "You need to be more careful," she said softly, her green eyes steady. "This place doesn't forgive mistakes." The group shared a brief moment of quiet camaraderie, the distant calls of unfamiliar birds weaving a fragile soundtrack around their camp. As dusk settled, they set up beneath the skeletal remains of a once-towering skyscraper, its glassless windows framing a sky streaked with orange and purple. The faint glow from the device cast eerie shadows that danced across their tired faces. Kale stared upward, the weight of their discovery settling heavily upon him. "This is just the beginning," he said, voice low but resolute. "If this technology can save the Earth, we have to protect it, no matter the cost." Lyra nodded, tightening the straps on her gear. "Then we move forward, together." Iran's gaze lingered on the device, a flicker of hope mingling with the fear of what they might awaken. "But we must be prepared," he warned. "Others will come for this, and not all will want to heal." As night cloaked the land, the faint hum persisted, a fragile beacon of hope beneath iron skies and poisoned earth, lighting the way toward the last horizon. The journey ahead promised peril, but also the promise of renewal. And for Kale and his companions, that promise was worth every risk. Beneath the iron skies, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth, faint and foreign to those who had known only the cold metal cages floating high above the poisoned ground. Kale stood at the edge of the newly claimed field, eyes tracing the fragile green shoots breaking stubbornly through cracked, toxic soil. Around him, survivors moved with cautious purpose, hands busy with planting, repairing, and building, a dance of hope amid the ruins. The sky above was a dull canvas smeared with lingering haze from years of decay and war, the sun's light muted but persistent. It was not the brilliant sky of old Earth, nor the stark steel blue of the floating cities, but something raw, real, and demanding. That sky bore the weight of humanity's failure and the promise of its rebirth. Kale's thoughts drifted back through the years, the endless scavenging in rusted corridors, the sharp crack of gunfire overhead, the faces of friends lost to betrayals and battle. He felt the ache deep in his chest, a wound both fresh and ancient. Yet here, beneath these iron skies, the faint pulse of life stirred, and with it, a stirring in his heart. "Kale," Lyra's voice broke through the quiet, soft but firm. She approached, her red hair streaked with dust and sweat, her eyes reflecting the same wary hope he carried. "The others are gathering around the fire, Myra's tending to the injured, and Iran's eager to share the latest findings." He nodded, taking a final breath of the cool, earthy air before following her steps toward the camp. The flickering firelight painted their faces in warm hues, chasing back the shadows of the long night. Around the fire, the group was a portrait of resilience, scarred, weary, but unbroken. Iran looked up from a worn set of schematics, glasses slipping down his nose. "The ancient technology could give us the tools to purify the soil and air," he said, voice low but steady. "It's a start, a way to fight back against the poison that's been choking this world." Myra added quietly, "And if we can keep everyone healthy, give them a chance to heal, there's no telling what we could rebuild." Kale felt the weight of their words settle like stones in his gut. The truth was clear. The path ahead was perilous, lined with unknown dangers and the ghosts of their past. Yet the alternative, clinging to the fractured metal cities, waiting for the inevitable collapse, was no longer an option. Later, alone in the dim glow of a makeshift command center, carved from the skeleton of a fallen sky platform, Cale traced his fingers over the maps and schematics spread before him, each line and symbol a thread in the tapestry of a new beginning. The hum of generators and the murmur of distant voices filled the space, a testament to life persisting against the odds. Memories flashed. The betrayals, the battles, the losses that shaped him. He paused, fingers lingering over a faded photograph tucked beneath the maps, the faces of those he had lost, their eyes forever etched with hope and sorrow. A sudden rumble shook the ground, a distant echo of the final collapse of the last floating city segment. Cale stepped outside just in time to see iron beams fall like ancient bones, the structure's death throes silhouetted against the dimming sky. Around him, survivors watched in silence, a collective breath held in reverence and fear. The dawn broke faintly through the heavy clouds, casting a pale light on the faces turned upward. It was a new day, fragile and uncertain, but theirs to claim. Cale inhaled deeply, the taste of earth and sky mingling on his tongue, and felt a cautious hope flicker within. "We are no longer beneath cities held aloft by steel and lies," he whispered. "We are beneath iron skies, yes, but also beneath the weight of our choices, and it is here on this scarred earth that we will decide what comes next." As the survivors set to work, planting seeds, repairing shelters, and sharing stories by firelight, Cale knew the journey was far from over. The ghosts of the past would not fade easily, and the poisoned earth still held its dangers. But together, they had taken the first steps toward healing a broken world. Under the iron skies and the heavy clouds, humanity's fragile flame burned anew, tense, unsteady, but undeniably alive. The story was ending, yet the true struggle, the true hope, had only just begun.